All right, so this is going to be a quick little video on blocking out 3D models for your projects. Now, depending on what you're working on, it may be a little bit different. So environment art, you might be doing more simplistic blockouts, whereas if you're doing a vehicle, they might be more complex. However, you might be doing more objects for an environment, whereas vehicles you might be doing less. So just keep that in mind. It plays in both directions, depending on what you're working on. With that in mind, we're going to go ahead and get started here. Now, this is not going to be a modeling tutorial, so just keep that in mind. I'm just simply explaining the logic and reasoning behind blocking out any kind of 3D shape for your project. One of the things you do want to establish first, of course, is going to be your scale. So this cube, I'm going to make it 1.8 meters tall, and I'm going to make it 0.7 meters thick. All right, so this is a good representation of the size of a human being if they're just standing there inside of a box. So just keep that in mind. It helps to have a humanoid figure that's rigged so you can pose it. That way, if you're doing vehicles, you can sit them into the chair of the vehicle, see how they're going to sit there and the scale and everything else like that. So just keep that in mind. But if you don't have that, you can go ahead and use something like this just for a quick reference on size. All right. With that in mind, the primary purpose of a blockout in environment art is to establish the objects you might need and also their overall shape and form. It's not too much more than that usually. And so if we were making, say, a office space, we might want to make like a little trash can or something, right? And I'm going to move this one back down. Apparently I moved it too high. Okay. And so we want to figure out where that trash can might go, how it exists, and what it kind of basically looks like. In this case, I'm going to select this section here, this section, loop tools, and circle it. There you go. So you might want to just represent a quick, simple trash can shape on where it would be placed in the environment now. It can be utilized for the level designer. So you'll know that this is the shape, the size. You can save this out somewhere as a temporary piece. It can be brought into the game engine as an object, and then the level designers can go ahead and start using this and put it into the scene. So you can do this with whatever else you might want to create. So if you're creating some kind of like pots or something that have plants in it, you can do that, of course, as well, right? And so they might be very simplistic and nothing much more than that, to be honest. Just getting the overall shape and form and everything going. Okay. Whereas vehicles is an entirely different story. So we're going to leave those ones there. Actually, we'll just hide them. Actually, let's just delete them. I'm not going to use those. So vehicles, on the other hand, are quite a bit different. I'm going to actually use box cutter to get started here. And I'm just going to create a quick shape here of some kind of form. I don't know what it's going to be exactly. Say it's some kind of vehicles, alien spacecraft, or futuristic thing. Okay. Now, how far you take your details on your blockouts is entirely up to you, but you can do bevels, you can use subdivision surfaces, you can kind of do whatever you want for the most part. More or less, what it's going to end up being is a dirty low poly model, more or less. So just keep that in mind. I don't want that edge there beveling. There we go. All right. So you can do things like this. And then you can always add to it. So with box cutter, you can just do things like this, whatever. Cut things into it. And let's taper it. There we go. Okay, so all my videos were leading up to this point where we can start doing these kind of blockout shapes like this. Now you start to understand that, well, this is why it's a good practice exercise to do a subdivision workflow on something like this and cutting out all the shapes so they subdivide well. Because if you're doing a more smooth surface, an organic surface, you're going to want to use that sub D during your blockout process most likely, but it's not required. You can always do it later, so just keep that in mind. You can work this however you choose and see fit. All right, with that in mind, let's say this is some kind of vehicle here. And I'm going to bring a little nose section forward and just scale it down. Okay. Say this is going to be the window here. And we'll keep it kind of flat. Why not? I'm going to do an inset like this. I'm going to delete this real quick. Now, if I try to, I'm going to press Control A, apply rotation scale, Shift D to duplicate, right click, go into edit mode, Alt N, flip, and if I try to do an inset now, press I to turn off that individual face thing, and hold Shift and do this number, you'll see that, well, nothing's working on the inset, which sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. In this case, it's not. And so we'll have to actually go through this and be pretty meticulous on what we're going to end up doing. We could also try doing a mesh transform, and there's a push-pull option. Okay, so you can always try this one as well, just to push everything in a little bit. And this tends to work out fairly well, but you can see already it's got a couple little issues. And so we'll have to go around and correct things like that manually and kind of create the thickness of the skin of the craft. So if this was a vehicle, you definitely want to have some thickness to it, right? So you'll have an interior and exterior. Now this is a pretty simplistic basis here of what we're working on. This is not probably enough detail to really to hold anything, so you'll have to go back and remodel this at some point. So you can take your time on the blockout, but it doesn't have to eat up all your time. You can get quite messy with it. You'll just have to rework it, but reworking it adds a little bit of time in the later process, but it allows for a little bit more creativity as you're starting to block out. So you can start to fill out your shapes, your designs, and get things going a lot nicer, or a lot quicker. Anyways, a lot more things. And so you can solve all the problems you have or found along the way later on. Nonetheless, we can see this is going on like this. Maybe this craft here is a little bit too small, because if there was a pilot in there, he can't stand up. And so we might want to just scale it up. Something a little bit more reasonable for a character player in a game to actually be able to walk into the cockpit area, right? So something like that maybe. That might be more understandable. So now we can actually start working the inside of this if we wanted as well. Depending on what you want to do, there's a lot of options here when it comes to the design. You can design anything you want for the most part. And so I'm going to take these sections and press F, create that face. I'm going to separate it. And I'll use little pieces like that, the wireframes and stuff, to start making out the shapes I want, the things I need. So if I want some kind of like flight deck, I can do this. And I can just start to scale it around and make it look however I want, line it up with each other. So this is part of the blockout process because you're trying to identify the playable area. In this case, inside of this craft, so a lot of games you can enter inside the vehicles. And you're going to have a little bit of room for error here, but you want to try to get it all about right, mostly. So maybe this is like some kind of ramp. Goes down to this floor. Right. So there's like maybe a little crawl space cargo holding area down here. Maybe it's mostly unplayable. Maybe you can get down here and there's like a couple crates you can get into or something, but you'd have to figure this all out on what you're going to utilize and what you're not. So like this little section, might just bring it down, same as before, separate it. Just make a little wall here for now. And bring them in. There you go. Maybe not that much. You see the floor is a little bit tricky right there. Let's bring it up. Usually you can use the wireframes as reference. So hold Alt while orbiting. I highly recommend doing that. Align that to the top. So it probably needs another little section that comes down. Just a tiny bit. It can be a little bit hard to tell what you're doing sometimes because of the views. It just is what it is. Actually, sometimes when you use material preview, I think it works a little bit better. Just turn viewport down to 1 and then turn on ambient occlusion. You don't have to turn on bloom. Turn on ambient occlusion, adjust it however you see fit. A lot of times it works well, but you do not get backface culling, so I want to point this out. Backface culling can be pretty important. Tell which direction your normals are facing. A lot of people run into this issue. So here, we can see this piece. If I was to isolate it by hitting /, you can see both sides. If you go into standard view here and turn on backface culling, you'll see that it's one of them doesn't have normals on it, right? It still happens like the EV material preview here. if you have a material applied to something, you have to actually check it in the material to turn that on and off. Okay, so just keep that in mind. But it can be useful to model in that view. I'll turn it off for now though. Then just we're going to extrude this on Y, just a little bit. Okay, so it creates some kind of wall now. So if there is a wall there, then that's a non-playable area underneath. You wouldn't need all these polygons obviously underneath here, or these back faces. So just keep that in mind. This is backwards, so I can recalculate outside. All right. But maybe I wanted to do, maybe I want to do something like this. Let's see if I can do a bridge edge loops here, which I can. Okay. I delete that bottom face. I want to raise this one up. So it's more like a doorway. Maybe there's like a gate here or something, some kind of internal doorway or bulkhead or something. I don't know. We'll figure that out later. But this is the point of blocking out. You want to figure all these things out as you're working on them because they're going to be pretty important later on. You know, if you want to put a blast door right here for some reason, some kind of gate or a fence, you might want to model all that out, at least at its basic, most rudimentary, like shapes and volumes, so you can kind of get it in place and get it going. All right. So even up here, for example, I'm going to use the floor for this. I'm going to snag these two polygons. I'm going to separate them, start working on these as a new object. So Machine Tools Smart Face, you can actually separate like that, by the way. So just by pressing the hotkey there. So I'm going to bring this up. We can use vertex snapping. Okay. And we can hold control and we can snap the things like that if we need to. So this one and this one, I'm going to Alt-A, Machine Tools, Align. Okay, done. I'm going to extrude this one up again. And I want to snap that to there and that to there. We'll bring this one up as well. So we can have some kind of like dashboard in there. Maybe some flight control panels and stuff like that. Instead of working on this section, I might just do it separate again. It's good to work in multiple pieces sometimes. A lot of times you'll find that you'll want to work in multiple pieces because it just saves time and effort instead of having to model it all and join it all together and boolean it and all that. You can use booleans, you can use box cutter, you can use subdivision surface models with blockout section, especially on a detailed object like a vehicle. It's going to be pretty beneficial in my opinion. Whereas I think it's the time to use no limits on your modeling abilities. If you want to sculpt something, sculpt something. You can always work it down to a lower resolution later if you need to. You're just trying to figure out those shapes and forms, how things are going to function, line up with each other, and how, you know, the whole time you're doing this, think about how it's all going to work together later on, right? So like this section is all behind that. I don't need none of this here. I just need that that face there, right? That's the only face I need. And so this one as well, I don't need it. That's doubled up. I'm going to mirror it. So Machine Tools, you can do Alt Shift and X, you can mirror, apply it. Can't mirror something that's asymmetrical. Just keep that in mind. So symmetry helps a lot in creating things fast and efficient. Just keep that in mind. Mirror the whole body, apply it, press Alt H. So now you can see we have the skin of the craft. We have an interior started, all kinds of fun stuff going on. If you hit the Shift tilde key, you can fly around. Use the mouse wheel to speed it up, slow down, hold Shift to kind of sprint. It's like you're playing a video game. If you press G, you get gravity. And so now you can actually walk around. So this will probably need some stairs, obviously. We can see up in here a little bit. Maybe you can crouch in here. It's like a little crawl space. Cool. And then we can put like some, maybe like a floor panel here that has this kind of exposed underneath, like a little cargo area with like ropes and stuff in it or something. And so you have to fill out your designs and you block it all out, basically. This is all you're going to be doing is just going through it and making sure everything's about the shapes and proportions you want. I keep pounding that away because it really is your time to test the design out. It's your time to figure out whether this is actually going to work or if it's not going to work. And you should spend, this should be one of the faster things you do, but you should still spend some time doing it. You don't want to go too fast through this process, especially if it's a detailed object like a hero asset, or it's a vehicle that you can enter and get out of. You're going to want to make sure everything's kind of going well anyways. So that should be okay there. Yeah, so I cut that little section out. Let's see here, probably got to cut this section out. But generally speaking, you should be feeling like you're creating a low poly, dirty, low poly model. That's what it should feel like if you're doing detailed objects. Okay. If you're doing an environment, you should feel like you're pushing out tons and tons of very basic models for the most part. But even in environments, you still need to block some things out with details, such as like an environment piece that's interior. You might need to take a little bit of time and block out staircases correctly with the right dimensions and everything else to make sure it's going to work, especially if you're doing like modular kits and things like that. So, but you see how, it's a lot easier to create something that seems rather complex than you probably thought, because now you're seeing some results rather quickly. And you could take this and you just go with it from here. So, you do like engines as separate objects. You can do wings. You can do a little ramp that folds down, perhaps, right? You can block that out as well. That would be a good spot for a ramp right there. So you think of it like that. Like this whole section probably doesn't need to exist, right? Let's actually select that one so I can work on it. Let's separate it. I'm actually cutting a hole in here. So this could be a ramp of some sort. And I'm just going to extrude it up on Z. You would want to make sure the ramp actually lines up with everything as well. Recalculate it outside. So I'm going to put the pivot point down here, origin point. So when I rotate it, I can actually rotate it as if it was opening. Now suddenly, this is becoming something rather quickly, right? And of course, the ramp will need to be detailed, but this is a basic representation of a ramp. You might want to do some basic representations of all the different components you'll need as well, such as like hinges or whatever else. I mean, every game object you will actually create to make this thing. Joysticks, even the buttons, if you want to model out buttons, you could do that. Just keep them simple, so you're not spending all day on it, and then go through them, burn through them as fast as you can. But take your time making sure everything works together, right? You want to make sure it's all going to work together and that it's made in a way that will actually allow you to create a production ready asset in a kind of an efficient manner. It should actually go pretty smooth from a good blockout, because you can reuse a lot of your parts and pieces and components. So some of these things, like this, for example, maybe this dashboard comes out. You would want to do that correctly, and then maybe like detail it a little bit. So like secondary details, not necessarily primaries. I gotta merge it, actually, I think. It's not wanting to inset right. So you would want to do like secondary detail a little bit, not too much of it, but you could do greebled sections. You know what? Let's push this all back a second. I'm struggling here, guys. I'm struggling. All right, so we're gonna push it back. Merge it first. Now we'll push it back. It's a lot easier to do this. Something like that, maybe. Push this one back in. Oh, you could do that too. It's not too bad. Mirror it. Okay. So, yeah, even your greebles, you can model them out. So just give you a quick example. Say we had some kind of vent or something going on. Just gonna scale this, scale it. I'm gonna move it real quick. And set it, push it down. Just a basic idea or representation. So I'm going to separate that object. So that face, we have that. Just do like a number of cuts real quick, do a bevel, get rid of that one in the middle there. I'll make these real small and I'll delete the faces. So now we have all these. We just simply go through, grab every one of these. There's other ways of doing this. You could use like an erase or whatever, but I'm just going to go through it real quick with this. Okay, so we got a basic blocked out vent, nothing crazy. Is it going to have rounded corners? That's some things you might want to block in as well. Not always, but sometimes. All right, so I'm going to join these back together. I'll put the pivot point on the back side here. Face. I'll delete the face. And I'm going to actually move the pivot point down to about the center, something like that. Okay, so I want to apply rotation and scale, okay? I want to point this out real quick. Apply rotation and scale. You always want to have ones on your scale because when you start using instances, you want to make sure everything's scaled correctly and appropriately because instead of doing a duplicate, which wouldn't work very well, we can do an instance instead. So I can press Alt-D. Well, before we do that, we're going to do snap machine tools, snap to surface, which does face, align rotation, median, and that's pretty much it. So now I can press Alt-D, which instead of creating a duplicate, will create a an instance. So I could do Alt-D, click, and hold Control, right? And so instances, if I edit that one, it will edit that one, or vice versa. And so I can actually move this around inside of here relatively easy. I can just press G and hold Control, and maybe I need to line it up a little bit better because it's a little bit rotated. You could switch to, right now we're using surface snap, but we could switch to individual or local, right? And that will help a little bit as well because now we could more than likely, you can see the Z-axis or the Z-axis. We can rotate like that, but also the green one, the Y-axis. So something like that might be useful, right? We want to line it up just right with that line, that edge there. So now we can press, don't duplicate it, I press Alt-D. You want to use Alt-D from now on. So I could do Alt-D like that and then hit Shift-R and repeat it down. You can see they're all kind of moving a little bit. That can happen. So you just press G and hold Control. Try to snap it, see if it fixes it. Nope, not in this case. So you might have to manually adjust some things if you have these more curvy surfaces. You can see on this one it's pretty curvy, so just going to line them up the best I can. And then I'm going to pull them all forward a little bit. On global, on X. So we can get something like this going a little bit. You can see it's still not enough offset. And they're kind of all over the place with the rotation and stuff. So what I'm going to do is align all of these with this rotation of this one. So no location, just rotation, and we're going to be doing Y, I think. Yeah, Y, okay. All right. But this is important to also check and test. That's why you want to do some greebles and stuff like that, because this shape is not the right proportions. So it might be better to just do a little bit extra like that maybe. Okay. You'll see that these ones are updated as well. So now they actually have a little bit of room to kind of breathe there on the surface. But there's still a little bit of weird intersection going on. So we might just grab this. Oop. Might just grab that and just move it up. Something like that. That should have fixed that area up well enough. Not perfect, but it's a little bit better anyways. Just make sure they're not poking through, right? Oh, they're poking through now. So we'll pull them out a little bit more. All right. And this is where you find all your problems in your model. Okay. You'll find out what works, what doesn't work. how it's going to work together with other components and pieces and parts. You can see I got a little section in here in the dashboard now that is completely visible. Hit tilde key to view selected. You see that's probably a little bit of a problem right there. Let's merge all that real quick. Let's see what we can do here. This should fill in no problems. Good. Two separate objects right now, so that obviously it's not going to do it that way. You could combine them together and then try to separate them again later. I think that's a bit annoying myself. Instead, I'll use vertex snap, and I'm going to use active element, and I'm always going to select where I want to extrude from. Just snap like that. It's a lot easier. So these won't be combined together at least. So maybe this one will go up here. I don't even know which one it goes to. It's kind of hard to tell sometimes, right? There you go. That one there. That one could go to there. So you can build sections like that out. And then before you know it, you're in business. This one should be okay to mirror. There you go. Okay. All right, so that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed checking out this little process of creating vehicles. When you're walking around, sometimes you'll hop up on top of other faces for whatever reason, but just keep that in mind. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed and learned something pretty interesting here. Hopefully you can play with this idea and take it a little step further. Spend some time on this, get it all set and built just right, and then go back through and work these little sections to make these as best as you can. That's all you're going to do for the most part. Optimize them and do everything else. So anyways, take care. Hope you enjoyed, and check out the next one, all right?